Hello, my dear young friends. Once again, a very warm welcome to the next session of interviews. The topic of importance not only for your examination point of view but also your future point of view. In today's session, we will discuss about what are the different types of interviews, and because this is very important, uh, because what happens is there is not one kind of an interview which is universal or which is the most acceptable one, because what happens is depending on the context and depending upon the requirement, the different types of interviews are being held. And moreover, what happens as a candidate for a particular job, a particular kind of interview will be held so that the most suitable candidate can be selected. And it is not like having the same selection process of interview that is being used all the times, because the demand of the job, the demand of the situation always is very important. And as the demand of the situation keeps changing, so does the pattern of interview also keeps changing. That is the first and foremost basic aspect of the different types of interview. Now coming to very few basic aspects of the interview, you will come across a very basic kind of interview which is called as screening interview. So what is the screening interview and what they are trying to screen at? What is the purpose of screening? So first and foremost is, now in the interview, actually interview is now being conducted to screen the suitable candidates for further selection process. Because what happens is in the first round of screening, it is very important to filter those candidates who are not required or who do not qualify for further rounds of interview. So it is a kind of process of filtration in the very first round, because if you have some idea about how the process of interviews or selection takes place in certain prestigious multinational companies, you will definitely come to know that it is not just one or two rounds of interview. There are multiple rounds of interview, which definitely are very demanding, sometimes taxing, but at the end of it, it is definitely worth every every minute of trouble which you take to secure that dream job of yours. So, screening is the very first step, the initial step, wherein the employers try to screen, the most eligible candidates for the successive rounds or for further rounds of selection. So, what happens is, like, they try to choose the suitable candidates, and in a way they also develop some kind of familiarity, and they understand the profile and the suitability of a candidate, because once they go through the profile, they find that a particular candidate is really deserving to be in a particular position or not. So the profile of the candidate is very important, kind of a parameter, which if it qualifies in the first round, then definitely he will get through the screening round of the interview. So the profile and suitability of the candidate is very important at the screening type of the interview. And why do we use this screening type of interview? So generally what happens is we use this screening type of interview so as to shortlist the candidates. It is like you have a big number of candidates, and you really don't know who is the best candidate, or who are the potential candidates who are likely to get the advertised jobs. So what do we do? With the screening type of interview, we try to shortlist, we try to make a shortlist of who the best candidates are, who could be taken to another round of interview. So this is the first type of interview, the screening type of interview, the basic one. And going further, we have something called as the panel interview. What is this panel interview? Or it is also called as a committee level interview, a committee interview, or a panel interview. So what does this panel interview does? What is the purpose of having a panel interview? So here the panel interview is being conducted to do a very objective evaluation of the candidate, whether the candidate is really suitable to be offered the advertised job in the organization or not. So this panel consists of people who are experts from various domains, people who are experts in their respective fields. They are all brought into a kind of a committee or a panel. So the objective is to evaluate the suitability of a candidate. So here the panel, what could be the size of a panel? So there is actually no fixed number as such to have the size of a panel. The panel could be as small as 3 or as big as 7 or 8. Bigger the panel, you have a wide variety of experts who will definitely uh, you know uh, be very tactful in judging the caliber, the capacity of a candidate, and whether the candidate can live up to the expectations of the company, to the organization, to the nation, in terms of the interviews such as IAS or IPS interviews. So the second type of interview here is called as the panel interview, the committee interview. And now going further, we have something called as one-to-one interview. What is this one-to-one interview? So just as the screening interview, the one-to-one interview is generally adopted at the very first level, because in the one-to-one interview, what happens is it can happen between the candidate and the HR of the company. So all the basic information is also shared between the HR and the candidate in the one-to-one interview. And sometimes it can also happen with the technical head of any particular project or the company, and sometimes with the project head of the company also, the one-to-one interview might happen. So this is the third type of interview which one actually has to learn. And then you have something called as the group interview. And why do we need the group interview? So group interviews can happen here for evaluating the group skills of a candidate. So, what are the group skills of a candidate? Whether the person, the candidate, is a team player or not. Why? Because a candidate who has extraordinary IQ may sometimes lack his social or economic or emotional quotient. The IQ may be very high. The IQ may be as high as say 130 or 140, and as you know, a normal person's IQ is just 90 or 95. A normal person, or a person, a generally speaking level of IQ 90 to 95. And you have a person who is a genius and who has highly exceptional IQ, ranging 130, 135, and even sometimes 140. But what is the use of having this enormous IQ when the candidate has no what do you call social quotient, when the candidate has no emotional balance and lacks the emotional quotient? So such candidates definitely cannot become very good team players, which an organization definitely needs for the success of a very healthy working environment. Because what happens if the candidate is not a team player, then the candidate definitely cannot get along with his colleagues. Because whenever there are certain projects which an organization, which a company, sometimes which the sector of government gets, such projects must definitely be performed, must be satisfactorily done with the help of various team members. And if the candidate doesn't prove himself to be a good team member, then he cannot be an asset to the company. Is definitely a kind of liability to the company. Because due to the lack of social skills and lack of the emotional quotient or the emotional balance, as one can say, that could jeopardize the progress of a company, that could be detrimental to the progress of a company. So the group interview definitely helps in evaluating the group skills, which are very important for any company to progress. So moving further, we have certain basic kind of interviews, which generally is not very formal in nature, but which tries to bring down the kind of formality, the element of formality, so that one can try to put the candidate at ease, try to make the candidate comfortable, and which will definitely go a very long way in building a good rapport with the candidate, and probably like try to get the best out of him. So the personality of the candidate is being explored in interviews such as the lunch interview. Why do we need the concept of lunch interview? So first and foremost, it tries to put the candidate in a very informal kind of a setup. Why? Because the candidate definitely is being put to a comfortable zone as such, and the candidate definitely feels a lesser tension, and he is able to perform better, and probably with lesser tension and better performance, the best in the candidate can be harnessed, so as to bring the best talent into the organization, into the company as such. So the lunch interview generally is opted to test the personality of a candidate in a very in a casual context. There are not all the formalities which happen in a regular interview, because a lunch interview is a kind of a semi formal interview. Although the objective and purpose, there is no compromise in the objective and purpose. The purpose and objective remain the same. It is to select the best candidate in the particular job. And now what happens is, in the lunch interview, there are so many interesting things in the lunch interview here. The lunch interview actually, it is also kind of a good measurement, even when some things related to the personal matters, then the table manners, then the values and belief systems of the candidate also can be sort of understood during the lunch interview. So some pretty interesting things which are very unique to lunch interview. And going further, we have the telephonic interview. And why is the telephonic interview sought after by many of the employers? So today we are living in the uh, times of the pandemic. So it is not very advisable to go out, and to go out in a sense even for any formal occasion such as interview, or for any such formal matters. So what is the next option? How do we get to know the candidate? How do we select the candidates? Through interviews. So now the telephonic interview, here it comes to the rescue of many companies, many organizations as such. So why is telephonic interview a much sought after interview? One thing is that the telephonic interview is not only cheap and inexpensive, it will also try to bring out the candidate's expression, the candidate's values, the candidate's beliefs during the interview. And again, since there is a lack of face to face element in the telephonic interview, probably my feeling is that the candidate will definitely feel a little less tense about the missing of face to face interview or one to one interview, as is the norm that has been in practice for so long. So telephonic interview tries to put down the element of what do you call the one to one and the facial expressions which are generally seen in any kind of interview. So a candidate is like much at ease. The tension level is a little lesser than the regular one to one or the screening type of interview which we see in the earlier types of interviews. And going further, we have something called as the structured interview. So what is this structured interview, and what is the meaning of this structured interview? So here the structured interview means there is a set pattern which has been established to analyze and to judge the candidates. So a structured interview is very well structured. The objective is very clear, and what the candidates are expected, or what the employers, the HR especially, seeks in a particular candidate is very clear and very well defined. So structured interview actually goes in a very systematic way, in a very step by step way, and there are definitely very clear answers which are sought. There cannot be the third answer. There can be only an yes or no answer, and you don't have the third option of can't say or I don't know, because such responses are not being given any option in the structured interview. So probably like the element of guess or the element of uncertainty is very less in a structured interview. So, my dear friends, going further, we have one more concept called as the video conferencing interview, which is the most sought after interview in the times of pandemic. Because and not only in times of pandemic, video conferencing also is sought after to reduce the expenses of travel and time. And video conferencing, it helps a lot of people, they can cut down on their travel, they can cut down on their unnecessary wastage of time and resources. I'm very glad that the Prime Minister of India, our Shri Narendra Modi ji, also uses a lot of this video conferencing when he tries to connect with the chief ministers and the leaders of various states across India. Because instead of all the chief ministers and leaders, rushing to Delhi and trying to put a burden on the taxpayers' money, the video conferencing goes a very long way in bringing out a cost effective measure, and at the same time a very focused kind of an interview, a focused kind of a meeting which the prime minister holds with the chief ministers and leaders of various states. So coming back to the concept of video conferencing interview, the main advantage here is the candidate who is not visible, or or the candidate who is faceless almost in a telephonic interview will definitely has to show his face. And the face to face interview concept is back to the picture once again. It makes the system of interview more human, and maybe it brings out the element of a human in the interview more than the telephonic interview. Because here at least we see the people and the persons face to face, so that at least the facial expressions, and and also we have a clear picture at least of the partial gestures which the candidate makes during the interview, so as to assess the kind of interest or the kind of responses which the candidate clearly shows during any kind of interview. So with these things, we have touched upon the various types of interviews, starting from screening interview. Screening interview was the very first interview which we all discussed. Screening interview was a very basic kind of an interview wherein the candidate's basic information, it was just like adding to the resume. And the screening type of interview is the first level wherein we try to bring the best possible candidates, or kind of a shortlisting of the candidates. Because the shortlisting of candidates is very important. Only after shortlisting, the best of the candidates are selected for further rounds of interview. And the next type of interview, when you have people of various expertise, people belonging to various domains, forming a panel, that type of interview is called as a committee or a panel interview. And going further, you have something called as one-to-one interview. One-to-one is a face-to-face interview wherein the person sits, we discuss, we talk, and then it happens at a one-to-one level. So it is a very closed kind of an interview. the environment is closed interview. And then it tries to try to build a rapport with the candidate. The HR of the company tries to build a rapport, and if the candidate is worthy, or if the candidate meets up to the expectation, then the interviews are taken to the further level. And then you have certain skills which are always measured in the group interview, because as I told you earlier, the group interview is one place wherein you can assess the social quotient, the social skills, and also the emotional quotient or the emotional skills of a candidate. Because a person may be very good in his knowledge, but if he fails to have the social skills, and if he is not a team player, then the candidate definitely will cut a very sorry figure and may not be the right person in an organization. He may be an odd man in the organization. So the group interview is another type of interview which one must understand. And coming to lesser serious kinds of interview, you have the lunch interview, which tries to bring out the personality of the candidate in a rather informal context, although the purpose of objective is to select the best candidate for the company. And then you have the concepts such as telephonic interview, and finally you have the process of video conferencing. So these are various types of interviews which keep happening across different companies and different organizations. In the next session, we will have a discussion, a very important discussion or important aspects of the preparation for interviews. So kindly pay attention, as this topic is of lot of importance, not only to your exam, as I told you, but also for your future employment point of view. Well, thank you, dear friends, for your patient hearing.